spent $50, maybe over $100,000 on a Mercedes-Benz. And right now, without even knowing it, you might be making mistakes that will cost you thousands more in completely avoidable repairs. These are not driving habits. These are ownership mistakes. Things you do in the garage, at the car wash, and during routine maintenance that quietly destroy some of the most expensive components in your car. Mercedes technicians see these same mistakes every single week. These are 15 expensive mistakes Mercedes owners need to stop making immediately. Number 15. Taking your Mercedes through automatic car washes with spinning brushes. Those giant rotating brushes at the drive-through car wash look harmless. They are not. Mercedes uses a multi-stage paint system with a clear coat that is thinner than you think, and those brushes drag dirt, sand and grit from the car that went through before you directly across your paint. Every pass leaves microscopic scratches called swirl marks. Over time, the finish dulls, the depth disappears, and what used to look like a mirror now looks like a faded version of the car you bought. Professional paint correction to remove swirl marks costs anywhere from $300 to over $1,000 depending on severity, and that is just to fix what the car wash caused. If you absolutely cannot hand wash, use a touchless car wash that relies on high pressure water and soap with no physical contact. Your clear coat will thank you. Number 14. Skipping the cabin air filter. This one sounds almost too simple to matter, but here is what happens. The cabin air filter sits in the HVAC airflow path, usually behind the glove box or under the hood near the cowl. When it clogs up with dust, pollen and debris, the blower motor has to work significantly harder to push the same amount of air into the cabin. A replacement cabin air filter costs $20 to $40 and takes about 5 minutes to swap. A blower motor replacement on a Mercedes runs $350 to over $800 depending on the model, and on some models, the labour alone is over $200 because of how buried the motor is behind the dashboard. Change the filter every 15,000 miles or once a year, whichever comes first. This is the cheapest insurance policy on your Mercedes. Number 13. Pressure washing the engine bay. There is a reason Mercedes technicians cringe when an owner says they just gave the engine bay a good cleaning with the pressure washer. Mercedes engine bays are packed with sensitive electronics. The ECU, wiring harness connectors, mass airflow sensor, and dozens of smaller sensors are all sitting in that space. And they were designed to handle rain splash, not a focused jet of high-pressure water. Water forced into a connector at high pressure can cause intermittent electrical faults that are incredibly difficult to diagnose. You might not notice the problem for days or even weeks until a random warning light appears or a system stops working. If you need to clean the engine bay, use low-pressure water, a gentle degreaser, and keep the spray away from electrical connectors and the air intake. A few minutes of caution saves you hours of diagnostic labour at the shop. Number 12. Replacing the battery without registering it to the car. Modern Mercedes vehicles have a battery management system that monitors the age and condition of the battery and adjusts the charging rate accordingly. An older battery gets charged more aggressively to compensate for degraded cells. When you install a fresh battery but do not register it through the car's computer, the system keeps charging at the old aggressive rate. That overcharges the new battery, generates excess heat, and can cut its lifespan in half. On models with stop-start, the system may also stop functioning entirely because it does not trust the battery. Registration requires a diagnostic scan tool or a trip to the dealer, and it takes about 10 minutes. Skipping it to save a few dollars now means buying another battery 2 years earlier than you should have to. Number 11. Using non-approved brake pads. Cheap aftermarket brake pads seem like an easy way to save money. But Mercedes brake systems are engineered around specific pad compounds, and swapping in the wrong pads creates problems beyond just stopping distance. The wrong compound can be too aggressive for the rotors, scoring them and creating an uneven surface that causes vibration and premature rotor replacement. Wrong pads can also trip the brake wear sensor incorrectly, throwing warnings on the dashboard that require a dealer visit to clear. And then there is the dust. Some aftermarket pads produce excessive brake dust that etches into the finish on Mercedes wheels, if not cleaned regularly. Once that dust bakes onto the wheel surface, it stains permanently. A set of quality brake pads approved for your specific model costs a little more upfront, but saves you from rotor replacement, sensor resets, and ruined wheels. Number 10. Ignoring the auxiliary battery malfunction warning. Every modern Mercedes has two batteries. The main battery starts the engine and powers the primary systems. The auxiliary battery handles backup functions like the transmission shift lock, infotainment memory, stability control, and the stop-start system. Hardly anyone even knows the auxiliary battery exists until the dashboard flashes auxiliary battery malfunction. And then they ignore it because the car still runs fine. It does for a while, but the main battery now has to compensate for every function the auxiliary battery used to handle. That extra load strains the alternator and shortens the main battery's life. Worse, certain electronic modules may start behaving erratically. Auxiliary batteries typically last 4 to 6 years and cost under $100 for the part. Ignoring the warning until it cascades into main battery failure and electrical gremlins can easily run over $1,000 to untangle. Number 9. Neglecting spark plug replacement on turbocharged Mercedes engines. Mercedes turbo engines run hot and under high compression. Spark plugs in these engines degrade faster than in naturally aspirated motors, and worn plugs do not just cause a rough idle. Under boost, a weak spark causes incomplete combustion. Unburned fuel gets pushed into the exhaust where it hits the catalytic converter and superheats the catalyst. Material. Do that enough times and the catalytic converter fails. Spark plugs for a Mercedes 4-cylinder turbo cost around $80 to $120 for a set. A catalytic converter replacement costs $1,500 to $3,000. Replace plugs every 30 to 45,000 miles on turbo models, even if the car still feels fine. By the time you feel the misfire, the damage is already underway. Number 8. Never cleaning or checking the sunroof drain tubes. Mercedes panoramic and standard sunroofs have 4 drain tubes, one at each corner, that channel rainwater away from the sunroof tray and down through the body of the car. Over time, leaves, dirt, and debris clog these tubes. When the water has nowhere to go, it overflows into the cabin. And here is where it gets truly expensive. The water does not just wet the carpet, it pools underneath, reaching electronics mounted under the seats and in the footwells, the SAM module, wiring. Harnesses, and sometimes even the transmission control module, sit in these areas depending on the model. One Mercedes owner reported 5 electronics components destroyed by water from a clogged sunroof drain, totaling over $5,000. The fix is absurdly simple. Once or twice a year, open the sunroof and blow compressed air through the drain holes in the corners of the sunroof tray. A 10-minute task that could save you thousands. Number 7. Using the wrong coolant or skipping the coolant flush. Mercedes-Benz requires a specific coolant formula, and it is not the green stuff you buy at the parts store. Mercedes Blue Coolant is designed for the specific alloys and gasket materials used in their engines. Using the wrong coolant or mixing different types creates a chemical reaction that corrodes internal seals and gaskets from the inside out. Even if you use the right coolant, it degrades over time. The corrosion inhibitors break down, the pH shifts, and the fluid becomes acidic. That acid attacks the head gasket, the water pump seals, and the radiator internals. A coolant flush every 2 years or 30,000 miles costs around $150 to $250. A head gasket replacement on a Mercedes 5.6 or V8 starts around $3,000 and climbs from there. The math is not close. Number 6. Never changing the transfer case fluid on 4MATIC models. The data on this channel shows that over 80% of you watching right now are not subscribed. That means you are showing up for the content, but the algorithm has no reason to show you the next video. If you care about keeping your Mercedes running right and avoiding expensive mistakes, hit subscribe. If you drive a 4MATIC Mercedes, you have a transfer case distributing power between the front and rear axles. That transfer case is filled with fluid that lubricates and cools the internal gears. Mercedes does not include transfer case fluid changes in most standard service schedules, so many owners have no idea it even needs to be done. The fluid breaks down over time, especially under heat from highway driving and towing. As it degrades, tiny metal particles accumulate and act like sandpaper on the internal gears and bearings. By the time you hear a whine or feel a vibration, the damage is already significant. A transfer case fluid change costs around $100 to $250. A transfer case replacement runs $3,000 to over $6,000 at a dealer. Service the fluid every 60,000 miles and you should never have to think about it again. Number 5. Ignoring a small chip in the windshield. On older cars, a windshield chip was a cosmetic annoyance. On a modern Mercedes, it is a financial time bomb. Nearly every current Mercedes model has cameras and sensors mounted to or near the windshield for systems like adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assist, and automatic emergency braking. A small chip left unrepaired can spread into a crack from temperature changes or a bump in the road. Once the crack crosses the camera's field of view, the entire windshield needs to be replaced. And after replacement, every single camera and sensor behind that windshield has to be professionally recalibrated. On a Mercedes, the total bill for windshield replacement plus ADAS recalibration can easily run $1,200 to $2,000 or more depending on the model. A chip repair costs $20 to $50 and takes 15 minutes. The longer you wait, the more likely the chip becomes a crack, and the crack becomes a multi-$1,000 problem. Number 4. Using cheap aftermarket parts on turbo oil feed and return lines. Turbo oil feed lines are a known weak point on many Mercedes turbocharged engines, including the M274 and M264 4-cylinders. These lines supply pressurized oil to the turbocharger bearings, and they operate under extreme heat cycles that cause the seals to harden and crack over time. When it is time to replace them, using a cheap aftermarket part with inferior seal materials saves you maybe $30 to $50 on the part. But if that seal fails 6 months later, the turbocharger loses oil pressure to the bearings. Turbo bearings spinning at over 100,000 revolutions per minute with no oil lubrication fail almost instantly. A turbocharger replacement on a Mercedes runs $2,000 to $4,000 depending on the model. This is one repair where OEM or OEM equivalent parts are worth every penny. Number 3. Believing the lifetime transmission fluid claim. Mercedes labels the transmission fluid in many of their 9-speed and older 7-speed automatics as lifetime fill. That means they do not include a transmission fluid change in the scheduled maintenance. And technically, they are not wrong. The fluid will last the lifetime of the transmission. The problem is that lifetime ends up being much shorter than it should. Transmission fluid degrades. It picks up metal shavings from normal gear wear. Its friction properties diminish. It loses its ability to cool effectively. By 80,000 to 100,000 miles, that fluid is working significantly harder than fresh fluid would be. A transmission fluid and filter service costs $300 to $600. A transmission rebuild starts around $4,000, and a full replacement can hit $8,000 or more. Other manufacturers using the same ZF 9-speed, including BMW and Jaguar, all recommend periodic service. Mercedes is the outlier, not the standard. Number 2. Ignoring Airmatic suspension warnings. If your Mercedes is equipped with Airmatic air suspension, you have a system that relies on air compressors, rubber air springs, electronic sensors, and a network of airlines all working together. When the dashboard says, Airmatic Visit Workshop, that is not a suggestion. Here is how the failure chain works. A small leak develops in one air spring. The compressor has to run longer and more frequently to keep the car level. That extra runtime overheats the compressor, which burns it out. Now you need a new compressor at $1,000 to $1,500 installed, plus the leaking air spring at another $1,200 to $2,000 per corner. If you catch the leak early, a single air spring repair is manageable. If you ignore the warning until the compressor fails too, you are looking at $3,000 to $5,000 or more. And on S-Class models with active body control hydraulic suspension, the numbers climb even higher. A failing ABC pump alone can cost $2,500 to $4,000. And number 1. the single most expensive mistake Mercedes owners make, letting small electrical warnings accumulate without diagnosis. A check engine light here, a traction control warning there, an intermittent message that disappears after restarting the car. The typical reaction is to assume the car still drives fine, so the warning is not urgent. On a Mercedes, that assumption